Good morning. Thank you for joining me today. This morning we'll be in Numbers, chapter 4, verse 1, through chapter 5, verse 31. Then the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, "Take a census of the Kohathites from among the Levites, by their families and by their clans, from 30 years old and upward to 50 years old, all who enter the company to do the work in the tent of meeting. This is the service of the Kohathites in the tent of meeting relating to the most holy things. When it is time for the camp to journey, Aaron and his sons must come and take down the screening curtain and cover the ark of the testimony with it. Then they must put over it a covering of fine leather, and spread over that a cloth entirely of blue, and then they must insert its poles. On the table of the presence they must spread a blue cloth, and put on it the dishes, the pans, the bowls, and the pitchers for pouring, and the bread of the presence must be on it continually. They must spread over them a scarlet cloth, and cover the same with a covering of fine leather, and they must insert its poles. They must take a blue cloth and cover the lampstand of the light with its lamps, its wick trimmers, its trays, and all its oil vessels with which they service it. Then they must put it with all its utensils in a covering of fine leather, and put it on a carrying beam. They must spread a blue cloth on the gold altar, and cover it with a covering of fine leather, and they must insert its poles. Then they must take all the utensils of the service, with which they serve in the sanctuary, put them in a blue cloth, cover them with a covering of fine leather, and put them on a carrying beam. Also they must take away the ashes from the altar, and spread a purple cloth over it. Then they must place on it all its implements with which they serve there, the trays, the meat forks, the shovels, the basins, and all the utensils of the altar. And they must spread on it a covering of fine leather, and then insert its poles. When Aaron and his sons have finished covering the sanctuary and all the furnishings of the sanctuary, when the camp is ready to journey, then the Kohathites will come to carry them. But they must not touch any holy thing, or they will die. These are the responsibilities of the Kohathites with the tent of meeting. The appointed responsibility of Eleazar, son of Aaron, the priest, is for the oil for the light, and the spiced incense, and the daily grain offering, and the anointing oil. He also has the appointed responsibility over all the tabernacle with all that is in it, over the sanctuary, and over all its furnishings. Then the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, "Do not allow the tribe of the family of the Kohathites to be cut off from among the Levites, but in order that they will live and not die when they approach the most holy things, do this for them. Aaron and his sons will go in and appoint each man to his service and his responsibility. But the Kohathites are not to go in to watch while the holy things are being covered, or they will die." Then the Lord spoke to Moses, "Also take a census of the Gershonites by their clans and by their families. You must number them from 30 years old and upward to 50 years old, all who enter the company to do the work of the tent of meeting. This is the service of the families of the Gershonites, as they serve and carry it. They must carry the curtains for the tabernacle and the tent of meeting with its covering, the covering of fine leather that is over it, the curtains for the entrance of the tent of meeting, the hangings for the courtyard, the curtain for the entrance of the gate of the court, which is around the tabernacle and the altar, and their ropes, along with all the furnishings for their service, and everything that is made for them, so they are to serve. All the service of the Gershonites, whether carrying loads or for any of their work, will be at the direction of Aaron and his sons. You will assign them all their tasks as their responsibility. This is the service of the families of the Gershonites concerning the tent of meeting. Their responsibilities will be under the authority of Ithamar, son of Aaron, the priest. As for the sons of Merari, you are to number them by their families and by their clans. You must number them from 30 years old and upward to 50 years old, all who enter the company to do the work of the tent of meeting. This is what they are responsible to carry as their entire service in the tent of meeting: the frames of the tabernacle, its crossbars, its posts, its sockets, and the posts of the surrounding courtyard with their sockets, tent pegs and ropes, along with all their furnishings, and everything for their service. You are to assign by names the items that each man is responsible to carry. This is the service of the family of the Merarites, their entire service concerning the tent of meeting, under the authority of Ithamar, son of Aaron the priest. So Moses and Aaron and the leaders of the community numbered the Kohathites by their families and by clans, from 30 years old and upward to 50 years old, everyone who entered the company for the work in the tent of meeting, and those of them numbered by their families were 2,750. These were those numbered from the families of the Kohathites, everyone who served in the tent of meeting, whom Moses and Aaron numbered according to the word of the Lord by the authority of Moses. Those numbered from the Gershonites by their families and by their clans, from 30 years old and upward to 50 years old, everyone who entered the company for the work in the tent of meeting, those of them numbered by their families, by their clans, were 2,630. These were those numbered from the families of the Gershonites, everyone who served in the tent of meeting, whom Moses and Aaron numbered according to the word of the Lord. Those numbered from the families of the Merarites, by their families, by their clans, from 30 years old and upward to 50 years old, everyone who entered the company for the work in the tent of meeting, those of them numbered by their families were 3,200. These are those numbered from the families of the Merarites, whom Moses and Aaron numbered according to the word of the Lord by the authority of Moses. All who were numbered of the Levites, whom Moses, Aaron, and the leaders of Israel numbered by their families and by their clans, from 30 years old and upward to 50 years old, everyone who entered to do the work of service and the work of carrying relating to the tent of meeting, those of them numbered were 8,580. According to the word of the Lord, they were numbered, by the authority of Moses, each according to his service, and according to what he was to carry. Thus were they numbered by him, as the Lord had commanded Moses. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, "Command the Israelites to expel from the camp every leper, everyone who has a discharge, and whoever becomes defiled by a corpse. You must expel both men and women. You must put them outside the camp, so that they will not defile their camps, among which I live." So the Israelites did so, and expelled them outside the camp as the Lord had spoken to Moses. So the Israelites did. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, "Tell the Israelites, when a man or a woman commits any sin that people commit, thereby breaking faith with the Lord, and that person is found guilty, then he must confess his sin that he has committed, and must make full reparation, add 1/5 to it, and give it to whomever he wronged. But if the individual has no close relative to whom reparation can be made for the wrong, the reparation for the wrong must be paid to the Lord for the priest, in addition to the ram of atonement, by which atonement is made for him. Every offering of all the Israelites' holy things that they bring to the priest will be his. Every man's holy things will be his. Whatever any man gives the priest will be his." The Lord spoke to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and tell them, if any man's wife goes astray and behaves unfaithfully toward him, and a man has sexual relations with her without her husband knowing it, and it is hidden that she has defiled herself, since there was no witness against her, nor was she caught, and if jealous feelings come over him, and he becomes suspicious of his wife when she is defiled, or if jealous feelings come over him, and he becomes suspicious of his wife when she is not defiled, then the man must bring his wife to the priest, and he must bring the offering required for her, 1/10 of an ephah of barley meal. He must not pour olive oil on it, or put frankincense on it, because it is a grain offering of suspicion, a grain offering for remembering, for bringing iniquity to remembrance. Then the priest will bring her near, and have her stand before the Lord. The priest will then take holy water in a pottery jar, and take some of the dust that is on the floor of the tabernacle, and put it into the water. Then the priest will have the woman stand before the Lord, uncover the woman's head, and put the grain offering for remembering in her hands, which is the grain offering of suspicion. The priest will hold in his hand the bitter water that brings a curse. Then the priest will put the woman under oath, and say to her, "If no other man has had sexual relations with you, and if you have not gone astray and become defiled while under your husband's authority, may you be free from this bitter water that brings a curse. But if you have gone astray while under your husband's authority, and if you have defiled yourself, and some man other than your husband has had sexual relations with you, then the priest will put the woman under the oath of the curse, and will say to her, 'The Lord make you an attested curse among your people. If the Lord makes your thigh fall away, and your abdomen swell, and this water that causes the curse will go into your stomach, and make your abdomen swell and your thigh rot,' then the woman must say, 'Amen, Amen.' Then the priest will write these curses on a scroll, and then scrape them off into the bitter water. He will make the woman drink the bitter water that brings a curse, and the water that brings a curse will enter her to produce bitterness. The priest will take the grain offering of suspicion from the woman's hand, wave the grain offering before the Lord, and bring it to the altar. Then the priest will take a handful of the grain offering as its memorial portion, burn it on the altar, and afterward make the woman drink the water. When he has made her drink the water, then, if she has defiled herself and behaved unfaithfully toward her husband, the water that brings a curse will enter her to produce bitterness. Her abdomen will swell, her thigh will fall away, and the woman will become a curse among her people. But if the woman has not defiled herself and is clean, then she will be free of ill effects and will be able to bear children. This is the law for cases of jealousy, when a wife, while under her husband's authority, goes astray and defiles herself. Or when jealous feelings come over a man and he becomes suspicious of his wife, then he must have the woman stand before the Lord, and the priest will carry out all this law upon her. Then the man will be free from iniquity, but that woman will bear the consequences of her iniquity. Yeah, so first off, you had the duties of the Kohathites and the duties of the Merarites, which the Kohathites were in charge of moving the most holy things from one location to the other, except they couldn't just waltz into the tabernacle proper and pick them up. The sons of Aaron first had to come in and cover those things, and then they could come in and pick them up and take them where they were going. And then you had the Gershonites here, who were responsible for curtains and coverings, and those sorts of things. And then you had the Merarites, who were responsible for the structural components, the crossbars, posts, and sockets. Then subsequently, you had a command to expel out of the camp anyone who was ceremonially unclean. That is, the leper, the one who had a discharge, or whoever had become defiled by a corpse. And then you have the test on adultery here as the last thing we went over. I guess concerning the test on adultery here, before I get into Guzik's stuff, yeah, in order for this to be even executed, there had to be either jealousy, well, I guess jealousy on the husband's part, irrationally, or concealed lying on the woman's part. But I don't know. Take a census of the sons of Kohath. A general count of the men of the family of Kohath was recorded in Numbers 3:27 through 28. There were found to be 8,600 males among the sons of Kohath. The second count was required to see the number of the sons of Kohath who were of age to serve the tabernacle, so roughly a fourth of them. When the sons of Levi are mentioned in Numbers 3:17, their orders Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. This was presumably their birth order. However, in Numbers 4, Kohath is dealt with before Gershon and is given a seemingly more prestigious duty, the transport of the most holy furnishings of the tabernacle. The reason for this elevation of the second son over the older brother seems to be based on the sovereign selection of the Lord and the favored work he gives the family in proximity to the holiest things. God elevates the unexpected. In the culture of the Old Testament, an elder son was always favored over a younger son. It is not always so with God. In his unfolding plan, God favored Isaac over Ishmael, Jacob over Esau, Joseph over Reuben, Moses over Aaron, and David over his brothers. God does not always go against the culture's expectations of whom to favor by their birth, but he often does. from 30 years old and above even to 50 years old. In some ways, the years between 30 and 50 were thought to be the prime of a man's life, combining both wisdom and physical strength. When it came to the work in the tabernacle of meeting, God wanted the best from the family of the Kohathites. Numbers 8:24 says that the Levites entered their service at 25 years of age. According to some sources, the years between 25 and 30 were used for training. The rabbis said that the Levites began to learn to do the service at 25, and that having been instructed 5 years, they began the public service at 30. Adam Clarke thought that this, in principle, pointed to a retirement age for pastors and ministers. A preacher who devotes his whole time and strength to the service of the Church of God from 20 to 50 or 60 years of age should be then excused from his severe labor and maintained at the charge of the sanctuary. This would not only be a great comfort to a worn-out servant of God, but also of great use to the work of the ministry, which to be faithfully and effectually performed requires all the powers of the body and mind of man. Old faithful ministers are to be highly respected for their work's sake, and to be supplied with all the necessaries and comforts of life. But how little can they do in the public ministry of the word, however willing to work, when their eye waxes dim and their bodily strength fails? When the camp prepares to journey, the tabernacle of meeting was a portable temple or house of God. Because Israel journeyed through the wilderness on their way to the promised land, they needed a temple or house of God that could move with them. They shall take down the covering veil and cover the ark of the testimony with it. The ark of the covenant was holy, so it could only be covered and prepared for transport by the priests. The priests first covered it with the veil that separated the holy place from the most holy place. Then they covered the veil with badger skins, and finally with a cloth entirely of blue. They shall insert its poles. The Ark of the Covenant was not supposed to be directly touched by human hands. It had rings on the side, through which poles were inserted. The Ark was carried by these poles. This method of carrying with rings and poles was also used for the table of showbread, the altar of burnt offering, and the altar of incense. All the preparation suggests a rigorous training schedule before actual work would be done by a given priest. Aaron and his sons shall go in and appoint each of them to his service and his task. The Kohathites had a permanent place of service before the Lord and for Israel. They were to be specially appointed as individuals, appoint each of them in his service for their work, even though their work was only transporting the furnishings of the tabernacle. It was properly regarded as important, worthy service unto God, deserving of a specific appointment, lest they die. The Kohathites were not to even look at the holy things, as the priests covered them and prepared them for moving. They had a specific role to fulfill in their work for the Lord, and were not to go beyond that role. The penalty for going beyond what God had appointed could be death. For the family of the Gershonites, all who enter to perform the service. The word to perform the service are, as the margin tells us, literally to war the warfare. The hint of warfare in this phrase, in this context, is meaningful. The service of these Levites was relatively mundane. They did not perform sacrifice and were not even allowed to look at the sacred furnishings of the... Oh, this was for Kohath, not Gershon. They did not perform sacrifice and were not even allowed to look at the sacred furnishings of the tabernacle, yet their service was described in some sense as warfare. This speaks to a truth that many servants of God have known. When one begins to serve the Lord, his people, and a needy world in the name of Jesus, the warfare begins. Yeah. The Gershonites took the coverings. Merari, the structure. Those of the family of Merari were called to pack and transport the boards, pillars, and associated parts of the frame and structure of the tabernacle. This was difficult and important work. These boards and pillars and other pieces were usually covered with precious metals, and the estimated weight of the tabernacle was some 19,000 pounds, more than 8,600 kilos. You shall assign to each man by name the items he must carry. This was a highly organized work with each piece assigned to a specific man. The high level of organization shows the importance of the work, leaving none of it up to chance or the mere preference of the workers. Because their items were small and numerous, each Merarite was responsible for one particular item, so that none of them would be lost. Yeah. Imagine it comes together like a puzzle then, with each one bringing his own piece in. Yeah. Each man's service being valuable in order to get the whole of the tabernacle up and running. Without a board, there might be a gap in the side, or without a socket, one side might fall apart. But as all of them come together, the temple of God is made whole. Each according to his service and according to his task. Each man from these three family divisions, eligible to serve, had a role to play in doing the work of the tabernacle. No one family could do all the work. God made them dependent on each other to do the work. It is worthy of note that these Levites, although they were all equally consecrated to God, had not all exactly the same work to perform. God is not the God of all uniformity. There is a wondrous unity of plan and design in all that he does, but there is also an equally marvelous variety, from Spurgeon. Later, God would explain through the Apostle Paul that the church is to work like a body. Like a human body, the church has many parts, looking different, doing different jobs, and meeting different needs. Some parts are more visible, some less, but they are all essential, and all have the same DNA code. Much trouble is caused in the service of the Lord by those who desire a different calling than they have, or who are jealous of those who have a different calling, or by those who exalt one calling and debase another. Everyone has a place and a job, and all can set themselves to do it. The expulsion from the camp. Put out of the camp. It wasn't that any of these things made a person or proved them to be a notorious sinner, though that was often wrongly assumed. Rather, it was that leprosy, unclean discharges, and dead bodies were reminders of the effects of sin, from which Israel must separate as they prepare to march towards the Promised Land. You shall put out both male and female. Neither men nor women were to be excluded from this command. Neither perceived sympathy nor perceived superiority could spare someone the effects of sin in the world and our sinful nature. This does not, of course, mean they were left behind to perish, but that they were not allowed to march in their proper places with the tribes of their people. In the midst of which I dwell. The great reason for this commanded separation was because God lived in the camp of Israel, so there had to be an effort to separate from sin and its effects. The essential issue in all laws of purity in Israel was not magic or health or superstition. The great reality was that the presence of Yahweh in the camp, there can be no uncleanness where he dwells. The last words of verse 3 are dramatic in their presentation. I am dwelling in their midst. God is concerned with far more than our individual acts of sin. He demands our sin nature be addressed. Only in Jesus can our sin nature, the old man, be crucified, and the nature of Jesus, the new man, be given to us, making us new creations. God does not have a relationship of love and fellowship with the old man, but he does with the new man. If any man commits any sin that men commit in unfaithfulness against the Lord, um, then he shall confess and he shall make restitution. In addition to the confession of the sin, the guilty man also had to repay what he had defrauded. The just solution was not to put the guilty man in jail, but to command that he restore what he had taken. Because restitution is commanded, it indicates a case of sinning against another person, such as with theft, or in some cases withholding from God that which belongs to him. The practical importance of this law is obvious. Israel had been drawn up in battle array to march toward the Promised Land, but their unity would be shattered if they were squabbling among themselves and taking God's name in vain. Through restitution and sacrifice, peace with God and harmony with the nation could be restored. Plus 1/5. The restitution command must include a 20% penalty. The thief had to pay back what they took, and more. For without restitution, in every possible case, God will not forgive the iniquity of a man's sin. How can any person, in a case of defraud, with his neighbor's property in his possession, expect to receive mercy from the hand of a just and holy God? From Clark. And then the law of jealousy here. This unique passage deals with the problem of a spirit of jealousy in a marriage. Part of the foundation for marriage is the expectation that one spouse will be romantically and sexually faithful, and there is a justified jealousy that comes from this expectation. However, there may also be unfounded jealousy that can damage a marriage. This passage gave Israel a way to deal with a spirit of jealousy that may or may not be justified. If the spirit of jealousy comes upon him and he becomes jealous of his wife. Sometimes jealousy in a marriage is revealed to be justified. Other times it is found to be false. Either way, God gave Israel a way to deal with this spirit of jealousy. Sometimes a husband or wife knows by intuition if their spouse has been unfaithful through interpreting dozens of subtle indications. Yet this intuition is not infallible. It is sometimes wrong. Accusations of infidelity that can't be proven should be rightly resolved, and God gave Israel this unusual procedure to resolve such matters. This unusual law is evidence that God does not want couples to live in an ongoing state of jealousy. The Lord gave a ceremony to resolve jealous feelings in a marriage by either proving them or disproving them. This ceremony only dealt with an adulterous wife and not a husband, because for the most part, the law of Moses was case law. It was not meant to anticipate every potential situation, but to give examples that set precedents for other cases. Though not stated, it is likely that a similar ceremony would be practiced if a wife became suspicious of a husband's adultery. Allen relates a different type of testing to determine if an accused woman had committed adultery among the Babylonians, found in the Code of Hammurabi. The presumed unfaithful woman was to undergo the ordeal of trial by death by flinging herself into the sacred Euphrates River. If she was guilty, it was presumed she would drown. If innocent, she would survive the ordeal and would be able to return to her husband with no attachment of guilt. Oh man. Fling yourself into an active river. If you survive, you're innocent. Then the man shall bring his wife to the priest. This meant that the husband did not have the right to do as he pleased with his wife. He had to bring his wife to the priest and have the matter resolved by a higher authority. It was a serious, solemn thing to bring before the priest, discouraging, groundless, or frivolous accusations. This law must be seen considering its alternative in ancient and sometimes modern shame and honor cultures. In some such cultures, it would not be unusual for a jealous husband to simply murder his wife in the name of his honor and family honor. Without doubt, this law saved women who were innocent yet falsely accused from the wrath of a jealous husband. for bringing iniquity to remembrance. It wasn't that perhaps the wife committed adultery and didn't remember it. The sacrifice was not for the husband or wife to remember, but for the whole community to remember the terrible nature of either adultery or false accusation. Yeah, and that's a public forum to do it in, is have this whole ceremony conducted by the priest. And take some of the dust that is on the floor of the tabernacle and put it into the water. The water was made bitter from the dust that is on the floor of the tabernacle. While the woman held the grain offering in her hand, a reminder of fellowship with God, the priest pronounced an oath over the woman. The idea of the phrase, uncover the woman's head, in verse 18, is to unbind and let down her hair. The unbinding of the woman's hair is another hint that she was viewed as unclean. The priest shall put her under oath and say to the woman, in his oath, the priest would solemnly announce that if the woman was innocent of the accusation of adultery, she would be free from this bitter water that brings a curse. But if she was in fact guilty of adultery, she would be under the curse. The terminology that bitter water brings a curse is problematic. The Hebrew phrase could also be translated, the curse-bringing water of bitterness. It is not just the water was bitter tasting, but that this water had the potential of bearing with it a bitter curse. After the priest said this, the woman had to respond, Amen, so be it. She had to agree that if she was innocent, she deserved vindication, but if guilty, she deserved the punishment of the curse. A verdict of guilty yet excused was never in mind. Guilty or innocent, adultery was regarded as sin. Early Jewish exegesis likened the drink made from the ashes of the golden calf to the draught administered to suspected women. The water that brings a curse will enter her and become bitter. Over time, the judgment of God would be evident. If she came down with some type of internal disease, especially affecting her womb, it would be seen as evidence of her guilt. But if she was free from disease and continued to bear children, it would be seen as vindication. Notably, if the woman was guilty, her punishment was not in the hand of her husband, or even the community. Under the law of jealousy, the punishment of the woman was only in the hand of God. If the woman was innocent, it was known to the entire community. This ceremony could only work with some supernatural element involved. Drinking water with dust and ink doesn't normally cause internal disease, and only those guilty of adultery. However, the mental stress of knowing your guilt and openly proclaiming the rightness of judgment upon yourself cannot be good for one's health. At the very least, because this was a public ceremony, it made the entire community aware of the evil of adultery and the seriousness of trying to hide your sin. The existence of the ceremony itself was an incentive to faithfulness in marriage, and therefore it was good for the entire nation. This is the law of jealousy. This was a ceremony meant to bring resolution. Either the husband was right or wrong in his jealousy. If his wife had in fact been adulterous, he was right. If she had not been, he was wrong. The issue had to be settled, and this was the way given by God to ancient Israel to settle it. Yeah. And I had heard earlier some baseless comments about this being a abortion ceremony, which is ridiculous because, as was stated earlier, water, ink, and dust are not going to have an abortive effect. And this bit at the end here, in 528, but if the woman has not defiled herself and is clean, then she will be free of ill effects and will be able to bear children. Contrary to modern society, in ancient Israel, children were viewed as a blessing from the Lord, and thus the withholding of childbirth was viewed as a curse from the Lord, and also it being present was viewed as a blessing. So no, this is not an abortive rite. Anywho, thank you for joining me today. Hope you have a great day. Bye.